I'm Connor Old and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. And this week we're going to be looking at the 1976 class of Oscar movies, one of my all-time favorite Oscar movie years, yet I've not seen one film, and I'm going to be talking about that today, as well as the 1976 Oscar history, some of the five total nominees, and then also just answering my thoughts on the film, but also answering the question of why has this been forgotten. So, if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is I look at a film that's nominated for Best Picture, starting with 1988 and working backwards, that has sort of been forgotten in the sense that I've never heard of it, or just hasn't really remained in sort of the popular film discussion. Maybe it was important at the time. You know, the Oscars are supposed to symbolize the most important and most defining movies of that year. Yeah, a lot of times some of these films you've never even heard of. So I want to explore those and see if they are really as good as sort of the Oscars say, or if they held up, or if they're even more relevant today. So this year, like I said before, one of my favorite years because it's such a great class of movies, or that either I really love or I just feel passionate about. I'm starting with the winner, which was Rocky. Now, obviously, did not cover this one because this one's a classic. Everyone's heard of it, but still, it's still an amazing story. The fact that, you know, this was Stallone was a nobody. They loved the script, but he forced the studio to let him star in it, taking a major pay cut. This low-budget sort of independent movie. Yes, it was done by a studio, but the budget was so low. It was very much sort of the 70s style of being sort of fast and wild in that sense, shooting on location, popular introduction of the Steadicam, but then it became, you know, not only a critical hit, but a huge commercial hit, and then so ended up winning Best Picture as well. I mean, it's sort of the ultimate Hollywood hit, being a nobody to having a Best Picture winner, where you're the star and the writer, and it makes the most money that year. I mean, it's the highest grossing movie of the year. As the years going by, it is almost less and less likely to see something like that. It is kind of amazing in that sense, because a lot of the times in the 70s, 80s sort of drifted away from that, and been much more sort of independent, prestige adult dramas that were winning the Best Picture. But in the 70s, really, what we're about to see is that a lot of times the highest grossing movie of that year ended up winning Best Picture, or at least was nominated. I mean, something like Star Wars, which was sort of a very genre, still got nominated for Best Picture, and a lot of people thought it should have won. So that's just a sort of a defining feature. I think probably Annie Hall marks that sort of shift away from sort of the big popular movie by not going with Star Wars. But this is still sort of in the years we see with something previous years now with The Godfather, where that was a huge successful hit, ended up winning Best Picture as well. So there are some interesting points that we have to recognize with sort of the 70s, and Rocky, I think, definitely displays that. Another nominee is Taxi Driver. This is one of my all-time favorite films. I just really enjoy it, and it's one that this film has definitely held up. But it's a film that everyone talks about, so I didn't want to talk about that. Network is another film that I've seen, done by Sidney Lumet, who was a Master of Controlled Chaos director, so we've already covered him there. Also covered the film Network there. It's a really brilliant film, incredibly well written. In my opinion, one of the most well written films of all time, and this was a really great year for actors too, because Peter Finch for this movie ended up winning Best Actor, Best Lead Actor, but unfortunately actually died a few weeks before the ceremony, so. And that's unfortunate, but he also beat out, it's notable to he beat out what I consider sort of two legendary career-defining performances and characters in film history, that of Travis Bickle, Robert De Niro's character in Taxi Driver, and Rocky Balboa. You know, so those are two really iconic characters that were then beat out by Peter Finch. And Peter Finch does an incredible job, maybe not as good as those guys in my opinion, but still really great, just shows you the great class of the year. But then also All the President's Men, of which, you know, the two leads didn't even get nominated, but yet for a lot of people, it's a really great sort of journalism movie, and really defined the era and sort of the Watergate scandal. Sort of a seminal movie in that sense. I'm not an American, so I wonder how it placed to non-Americans, because for me, I was kind of lost and then didn't understand the stakes. So that was maybe a little bit of a disappointment for me, but still, those four movies are definitely all hits and all movies that people still talk about today. And then Bound for Glory, and that's just a movie I've never seen. You know, it's not a movie I've really heard of. Even if I did some research, and, you know, I found out, okay, it's done by Hal Ashby, but even Hal Ashby is a guy who was really dominant in the 70s and had this great sort of run, and then a strange run in the 80s, and then sort of got sort of cast out by Hollywood for sort of strange ways. He's a director that I want to cover on Masters of Control Chaos. So I was smart. I probably would have combined it, but I didn't. That being said, I still think that even with the general public maybe doesn't know him, but cinephiles really love him. So I wasn't sure if I should choose this film, but I've never heard of it. And even among sort of Hal Ashby lovers, it's not one of his absolute best movies. It's sort of middle of the road. So it's really only for people who are Hal Ashby sort of completionists or really want to explore his filmography. So I thought this was a good chance to really see why this one, for example, hasn't been as well remembered as some of his own filmography, but also hasn't been remembered in regards to all of the other films that were nominated this year. I mean, this was a great class of movies. So transitioning into my thoughts, I do want to mention sort of up top that while I respected the film, I'm not sure, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a whole lot. I mean, there are sort of films like that come along where everyone loves and you're just not completely on board, but you really respect and you see the sort of craftsmanship that went in and you're impressed by it, but some of the emotions don't really grab you. That was kind of the case in this scenario, and I have to admit that actually I really rarely do this, but I had to do it for this one. I watched this film in 2 sittings because I watched sort of the first hour and 15 minutes or whatever, and I was almost sort of nodding off a couple times. Now that could be sort of perceived as a negative, which in a sense, it is. It didn't keep me entertained, it didn't keep me engaged in the story, not even entertained, just engaged in its world. But very much the first hour is crafted sort of like this epic in a lot of ways, where they're just sort of, but there's only minuscule events. It seems like it's a 3-hour movie, but they're not preparing you for a 3-hour movie, if that makes any sense. It's very much sort of like a Lincoln or a Golden Pond, where its appeal is that it's so sort of soft and so soft spoken that it sort of lulls you to sleep, and a lot of people sort of lulls them into a trance, like a Terrence Malick film, and then can completely invest in that world. But sometimes it works oppositely, and you end up sort of falling for the movie, and it's sort of quiet, sort of rhythmic tones, and because I think that's just because the production designer and the tone and the atmosphere, and really the cinematography by Haskell Wexler, who ended up winning an Oscar for this movie, really is fantastic. It's a beautiful film to look at. There's amazing cinematography and beautiful sort of set up shots. One of them on top of the train talking, which just looks so gorgeous and something that you would never achieve before. And you can see why the 70s is really a landmark, a step in film, because you can see a movie like that where before you had to do sets and whatnot, but this one's very much on location, and it really gives out sort of a stunning look, even though it was probably dangerous, I would imagine. And then there's other shots like tracking shots through sort of the California camps that it goes through. And it's still a very interesting story, but I just feel that almost in a lot of ways, even though I watched it in 2 halves, maybe the film is sort of made in 2 halves. There is a sort of first half which is very sort of what's the right word? We'll say poetic. We'll say poetic in a lot of ways, slow but methodical, and that sort of has a certain feel to it. But as soon as I picked up on the second half, we very much see that struggle keep on continuing and then sort of stop, and then it's his rise to fame in sort of senses, and then sort of his passionate political beliefs put him down sort of a road that he almost rejects that fame. So it's a very interesting sort of second half, but that second half feels definitely more like a traditional biopic. Whereas the first half is very much more of just like a classic American story of the Great Depression era, almost like a Grapes of Wrath. And maybe if it ended there, it would have been another updated Grapes of Wrath, but this one's very much about his life, that second half. So you either like it or you don't. Maybe you like that half better or you don't, but that one's definitely more of a traditional sort of musical biopic, the sense that his music's in it and more of his rise to fame, his struggles at home that we've seen before. But the first half is sort of his journey to get there, which maybe I would cut down a bit or just make that the film. Like I just feel like there's conflicting parts where they want to make this sort of great Grapes of Wrath kind of epic, but then they also have to tack on Woody Gunther's life, or they stretch that out too much and then they forget about his life. So it depends on what you're sort of gravitating towards. That being said, there's really just a great color palette in this film. Really deep yellows, great browns, and David Carradine as Woody Gunther. Not nominated, surprisingly, but still an amazing performance and really showing the complexities of this character, because he's very much a 70s character in the sense that he's not this perfect person. He has struggles at home, and he has sort of a jumping mind. He always wants to go from one thing to the next. He never wants to sort of appreciate the moment in that sense. And really just sort of, an honest performance by David Carradine, and one of his best, I would say. Really fantastic. But really, why is this movie forgotten? There's maybe twofold. Maybe it's not the best in Hal Ashby's sort of filmography, and people don't want to go back until unless you're a Hal Ashby sort of completionist, or you're doing a series on Hal Ashby, or maybe I think that's one reason. But I think that also it's kind of not traditional in your music biopic sort of genre. This definitely was maybe the start of it. We started to get more of them in the 80s, the Buddy Holly story, Coal Miner's Daughter, and then now even today, this week, we have Rocket Man opening. So that's a really unique kind of trajectory for this sort of genre, and this one doesn't fit in that sort of traditional mold, because it would have started, I think, more than halfway through the movie, and the sort of struggle wouldn't have been in it. So it doesn't really fit into this certain specific genre as a sort of a career-defining one. It was one of the first ones, yes. A lot of people appreciate it, yes, but it doesn't really fit into that sort of traditional mold, whereas something like Superman does fit in sort of the traditional mold that we see in superhero movies today. Just it was the first one to do it, and it did it very well. Bound for Glory doesn't really fit necessarily into that genre. Also, it could be just the fact that maybe Hal Ashby, people who love it and they tell you to see it multiple times, but maybe Woody Guthrie, he's a 30s singer. Some people know him, he's very influential to Bob Dylan, for example, but he's not Bob Dylan. I'm Not There and all sort of different Bob Dylan documentaries are much more interesting to a lot of people than if I were to tell you, Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie, is he... You never maybe have heard of him before, or maybe he's not the most interesting figure to you, or 30s era Depression music doesn't sort of speak to the country that we're living in right now. So there's different reasons why he's not sort of remembered as well, except for maybe an older generation. But I was excited to understand his music and learn it, what I've enjoyed, and learn his story, because it was quite fascinating, even though I have to admit it did sort of lose my interest quite a few times. That being said, I do want to note before we end the episode that next week we're not doing the 1975 class of films because that's too good. We're going to jump a year. We're going to do the 1974 class of films. I'll explain that in the next video as well. So give me suggestions down below in the comments from 1974 onwards, because I don't know at this point, so I'm still trying to figure it out. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure to like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other of my videos. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and until next time, stay tuned.